Here's something I've never been able to get past. Legendary Pokémon is a category the games have never once bothered to define. There's no rulebook for it, no in-universe committee that sat down and drew a line. And yet the label gets applied to a creature that made time itself, and also to a slightly large bird that lives in a cave in the mountains. Same shelf, same word. That gap is sort of the whole reason I wanted to do this one. Because underneath all the box art and the big orchestral moments, the actual lore attached to these things is much stranger and much sadder than the marketing suggests. A lot of them were made in a lab. A lot of them were sealed away by the same people who used to worship them. Several of them are just objects that got angry, and at least one of them is a god whose type is normal. So tonight is a long unhurried walk through all of it, region by region, roughly 25 or so of these creatures, with plenty of detours, no rush. If you drift off around Johto, that's fine, nothing important happens later. If you fancy sticking around for more of these, there's a subscribe button somewhere. Anyway, Kanto first, since that's where the whole thing started more or less by accident. The best known story in Pokémon development history is also the one that most people only half remember, so it's worth telling properly. When Red and Green were being finished in 1995, the cartridge was full. Genuinely full. The team had been fighting for space for months, and the last stretch of development involved stripping out debugging code to make room for the actual game. And once that debug material came out, there was a small pocket of space left over, not much, enough for one more creature. Shigeki Morimoto put Mew in there, quietly, without telling the producers, and reportedly without any expectation that a single player would ever encounter it. It wasn't obtainable, it had no event attached to it, it was just sitting in the code like a coin down the back of a sofa. And then people found it, because people always find it, and the entire promotional machinery of the franchise reorganised itself around a Pokémon that was never meant to leave the building. The Mew distribution events in Japan, the Nintendo Power giveaways, the schoolyard rumours about trucks and Pokeballs under floorboards, all of that grew out of a bit of spare storage. I find that genuinely funny. The most mythologized creature in the whole thing exists because someone tidied up. Now the birds, Articuno, Zapdos and Moltres are, in terms of actual written lore, almost nothing. They don't have a myth. Nobody in Kanto tells you a story about them. They're at the end of a cave, at the top of a power plant, in a volcano, and you either go and get them or you don't. That's it. What they do have is Pokédex flavour, and the flavour is lovely. Articuno's entries describe it appearing to people who are lost in the mountains, which is the sort of thing that sounds like a blessing until you sit with it for 2 seconds. A legendary ice bird turns up when you're already in trouble in the snow. That's not obviously a rescue. Moltres is described as healing itself by dipping into molten lava, which is a wonderfully practical detail for a mythological firebird. Zapdos is said to appear when the sky splits with lightning, and to actually gain power from being struck by it. The three of them together are the purest version of what legendary originally meant as a design idea. Rare, elemental, unexplained, slightly beyond your business. No backstory required. Later generations would spend enormous effort building cosmologies, and I do love those, but there's something clean about a bird in a cave that the game simply does not explain. They do get revisited much later, in a way that's honestly quite bizarre, but we'll come to that when we get to Galar. Just park it. Then there's Mewtwo, and I want to come at it from a slightly odd angle, because the full origin story is something I've gone through at length in another video, and I'd rather not repeat myself at you for 10 minutes. So instead, the thing about Mewtwo that I think gets underweighted. Mewtwo is classified as a legendary Pokémon. It is also, unambiguously, and by the game's own documentation, manufactured. Made by people, in a building, on purpose, from genetic material taken from something else. It has a paper trail. There are lab notes. Which means that in the very first generation, before the category had really been established at all, the franchise had already broken it. Whatever legendary means, it apparently does not mean ancient, and it does not mean divine, and it does not mean naturally occurring. One of the first two members of the club was assembled about 20 years before the game starts by researchers whose work the game's own documentation refuses to describe neutrally. And the games are unusually blunt about how that happened. There's a stretch of Kanto documentation that describes the process in language the Pokédex almost never reaches for, the sort of wording that stops being clinical and starts being a verdict. The same reference work that elsewhere records how much a Rattata weighs. And it sets up a pattern that keeps recurring for the next 9 generations, which I'll flag now and then stop flagging, because I promise not to hammer it. There is a whole quiet lineage of legendary Pokémon that people built. Mewtwo is just the first one anybody noticed. Mew itself is the more philosophically strange of the two, mind you. Its Pokédex entries state that Mew contains the genetic code of every Pokémon in existence. Not is related to, or shares ancestry with, contains. All of them in one small pink creature that floats about in a jungle and, according to several entries, is so shy that most people believe it's a hallucination. Sit with that for a second. If Mew genuinely carries the full genetic library of every species, then Mew isn't an exception to the natural world of the games. Mew is the natural world of the games, in compressed form. Every Pidgey you've walked past is a variation on a theme that Mew is holding the master copy of. That reframes the whole idea of a legendary. It's not the rare thing at the edge of the map. It's the thing everything else is a copy of, which happens to also be at the edge of the map. And then people cloned it, obviously. Because of course they did. There's a good deal more buried in Kanto that isn't legendary business, and isn't for tonight. What matters here is that Kanto establishes a texture the franchise keeps returning to, which is that the interesting information is never in the main story. It's in journals nobody reads, and entries nobody stops on. I do think there's a case that Kanto's legendaries are more compelling for what they don't explain than what they do. The later games are wonderful, and I'll be enthusiastic about them for the next hour, but they do explain a great deal. Sinnoh will hand you a creation myth on a library shelf. Unova will give you a philosophical argument about consent. Paldea will give you an entire monarchy's worth of political consequence. Kanto gives you a bird at the end of a cave and absolutely no context. And there's a version of me that thinks that's the scarier option. Something small before we move on. The Kanto legendaries are the only ones in the franchise where the numbering tells you something. Articuno, Zapdos and Moltres are 144, 145 and 146. Mewtwo is 150. Mew is 151, right at the end, appended after the fact, sitting outside the neat 150 that the marketing was built on. Gotta catch 'em all was a slogan about 150 creatures, and the 151st was a secret that broke the number. Nobody planned that, it just worked out that way. Which is, I think, the most Kanto thing possible. And since we're on the subject of Mew, the distribution history is worth a minute because it's the reason so much folklore grew up around it. Nintendo's solution to a Pokémon that existed in the code but couldn't be obtained was to hand it out in person, physically, at events. In Japan, there was a competition where a small number of winners got their cartridges loaded with one. In America, Nintendo Power ran giveaways, and there were tour stops where you queued up with your Game Boy and a link cable, and somebody transferred one onto it. So for years, the only legitimate way to get Mew was to be in a specific building on a specific day, which is a genuinely odd thing to say about a piece of software. And into that gap poured the single largest body of playground mythology in gaming history. The truck by the SS Anne, which is real, which is a truck, and which does nothing at all. Bill's Garden. The idea that if you got to level 100 without losing a single battle, something would happen. The claim that Mew was under a specific tile in Cerulean, or in the unknown dungeon, or that you needed to use strength on a particular rock while holding a particular item. None of it worked. All of it circulated with total confidence, because the underlying claim was true. There genuinely was a hidden Pokémon that most players couldn't get. Everyone knew that much. So every specific method sounded plausible, because the general premise had already been confirmed. There is, incidentally, a real method. A glitch involving trainer encounters and the special stat discovered years later, which lets you produce a Mew on an unmodified cartridge. It's fiddly, and it involves walking away from a trainer at exactly the right moment. Nobody found it at the time. The actual answer was sitting there the whole while, and what everybody chased instead was a truck. I find that a lovely bit of accidental parallel with the rest of tonight, honestly. The information existed. Nobody was looking in the right place. Right. Johto next, which is where the franchise first decided these things ought to actually have stories attached. There's a building in a Krutik city that's been a ruin for as long as anyone in the game has been alive. You walk into it fairly early, the floor gives way, you fall into the basement, and 3 creatures you've never seen before look at you for about a second and a half, and then leave. That's the encounter. They don't battle you, they just go. The building is the burned tower, and the story behind it is, for my money, the best piece of legendary lore in the entire franchise. Nearly 1,000 years before the events of Gold and Silver, 2 towers were built in a Krutik, twins more or less, standing at opposite ends of the city. The stated purpose was to foster friendship between people and Pokémon, which sounds like the sort of thing a tourist board writes, but the games treat it seriously. People climbed those towers. Morty's ancestors, specifically, generation after generation, went up to the top to commune with what lived there. Because something did live there, Ho-Oh perched on one, Lugia, according to some tellings, perched on the other. Then 150 years before the games, lightning hit one of the towers, and it caught fire. The blaze was enormous. It was eventually put out by a sudden downpour, which is the sort of detail that would be filler in most stories, and is absolutely not filler here. Hold on to it. 3 Pokémon were inside when it burned. The game never names them, never says what species they were, never gives them anything. They're described only as 3 nameless Pokémon, and they died in the fire. Ho-Oh came back afterwards. Not during afterwards once the flames were out and there was nothing left to save. And it revived them. Here's the part that I think is genuinely brilliant, and I don't say that lightly. The 3 elements of that fire were the lightning strike, the raging blaze, and the sudden downpour that ended it. And the 3 Pokémon that came out the other side were Raikou, Entei, and Suicune. Thunder, fire, water, the manner of their death is the shape of what they became. They weren't given new bodies at random. They were given bodies made out of the thing that killed them. I don't know of another piece of Pokémon lore that's constructed that carefully. Nobody in the game points it out. It's just sitting there for anyone who lines up the details. Now the bit that gets skipped. What came next in the Krutik was not gratitude. The people of the city saw a creature bring the dead back to life, and the awe curdled fairly quickly into fear. Fear of a Pokémon with power over life and death, and by extension, fear of the 3 things it had just made. The accounts describe the townspeople turning on them. The trio didn't retaliate. They left. All of them, Ho-Oh included, went out into the wilderness and stayed there. And the reason they kept running from you in the original games isn't that they're skittish animals. It's that the last time they were around people, it went badly. That reframes the whole roaming mechanic, doesn't it? 3 legendaries that flee the instant you appear, because a century and a half ago, a city decided they were a problem. They did eventually come back to the ruins of the tower, not to the city, to the burnt-out shell of the building they died in. They eventually returned, waiting for a point at which humans might be worth trusting again. That's where you find them. It's a very specific kind of patient. So that's the brass tower, which, incidentally, is what it was called before the fire, though only in crystal. The naming was rather elegant: brass tower and tin tower, gold and silver panels facing each other across the city, matching the game titles. The remakes quietly renamed Tin Tower to Bell Tower and dropped the brass detail entirely, which severed the connection, and I've never been quite sure why they did it. Small loss, still a bit annoying. Ho-Oh, meanwhile, left to look for a trainer with a pure heart. And I want to point out that this is not flavor text. This is the actual in-game explanation for why you cannot find Ho-Oh for most of the game. It isn't hidden behind a puzzle or a level requirement. It is out somewhere else, doing a search, and it doesn't come back until you've assembled a set of bells and climbed the tower it lives on. There's a variant of the legend that says a rainbow appears wherever Ho-Oh flies, and that whoever sees it is promised eternal happiness. Which is nice, though. I'd note that the last people it made an appearance for ended up chasing 3 of its creations out of town, with, apparently, threats of violence. Mixed results on the eternal happiness front. Lugia is a different sort of thing entirely, and it's one of my favourite Pokédex readings anywhere. Lugia lives at the bottom of the sea, specifically in the Whirl Islands, in a chamber underneath the water, and the reason given is not that it likes it down there. The reason is that Lugia's wings are powerful enough that a single flap can level buildings, and storms have been attributed to it moving, so it went down to the deepest place it could find and stayed there. That's a legendary whose stated motivation is that it's too destructive to be near anyone. It's not hiding from people, it's protecting them by being unavailable. And the reason it ended up in the Whirl Islands specifically is that it fled there when the tower burned, which ties it into the same night as everything else. I think about that one a fair amount, actually. Something enormously powerful, concluding that the responsible thing to do is remove itself from the world entirely. It's not framed as tragic in the games, it's just stated flatly as habitat information. Celebi I'll keep short, because Celebi's lore is short. It's a small green Pokémon that travels through time. Forests bloom where it's been. That's essentially it in the main games, and what strikes me is how casually Johto dropped functional time travel into the setting and then didn't build anything around it for years. Generation 2 just went, yes, one of these can move through time. Anyway, here's a Miltank that will destroy you. Time travel becomes structurally enormous later. In 1999, it was a shrine in a forest that most players never reached. Suicune deserves its own moment, because Crystal built a whole subplot around it, and it's easy to miss if you only played Gold or Silver. Suicune is described as the embodiment of the North Wind, and its entries say it purifies water wherever it goes. Filthy water, stagnant water, whatever it is, it runs across it and it comes out clean. Which is a very gentle sort of power for something that came out of a burning building. In Crystal, there's a man called Usein who has been chasing it for years. Not to catch it particularly, he's just fascinated, and he's been following it around the region for most of his adult life. And he keeps turning up wherever you are, slightly disappointed that you got there first. He's obsessive in a way that's played as endearing rather than sinister, and I've always liked that the game gave one of these creatures a devoted human follower who isn't a villain and isn't a scientist. He's just a bloke who's really into it. Suicune in Crystal also stops running. Late in the game it turns and waits for you at the Tin Tower, which is the only one of the 3 that ever does that. The other 2 spend the entire game fleeing, which brings me to the roaming mechanic, and I want to defend it slightly, because everybody hates it. Roaming legendaries move between routes every time you change area. You look at your map, you see where it is, you travel there, and there's a chance of running into it, and when you do it, usually flees on the first turn. It is legitimately one of the most tedious systems the franchise has ever shipped, and I have lost hours to it that I will not get back. But it does something no other encounter does, which is make the catching feel like the pursuit it's supposed to be. You cannot corner these three. You can only be lucky and be prepared and keep going. Given that the entire reason they run is that people once turned on them, having them be genuinely difficult to pin down is, mechanically, telling you the story. I still think Master Balls should have been more common. Both things can be true. The thing Johto establishes, and the reason I like it so much, is that these creatures have histories with people that went wrong. Kanto's legendaries are natural phenomena and one lab accident. Johto's are participants in a specific event, in a specific city, with a specific date attached, and the aftermath of that event is why they behave the way they do a century and a half later. That's a step up in ambition, and the franchise kept climbing from there. Which brings us fairly naturally to Hoenn, where the legendaries stop being about death and return and start being about geology. Let's start at the top and work down, because everyone starts Hoenn at ground level, and I think that's the wrong way round. Rayquaza does not live anywhere. That's the first thing. It has no cave, no temple, no sealed chamber. Its habitat, as stated by the Pokédex, is the ozone layer. Not near it, not above the clouds in a vague sense. In it. The stratosphere is where it exists, and it has apparently been circling the planet up there for hundreds of millions of years. Rayquaza is a legendary in the franchise that turns up uninvited. Not every other one has to be reached. You climb somewhere, or you solve something, or you gather 3 keys, or you play a flute. Groudon and Kyogre both have to be deliberately woken by people who shouldn't be waking them. Rayquaza is the exception. In Emerald, at the point where the world is coming apart, it simply arrives. Nobody summoned it. Nobody had a plan involving it. It descends into the middle of somebody else's disaster, sorts it out, and leaves. It's also, and I love this detail, the only Pokémon in the games that can Mega Evolve without a Mega Stone. Every other Mega needs the stone, and the ring, and the bond. Rayquaza needs to know a particular move, and that's the entire requirement. The rules that govern everybody else's transformation do not apply to it, which is about the most concise way the games have ever expressed that something outranks the system it's in. Now Groudon and Kyogre, I've covered the argument becomes geography reading elsewhere, and I don't want to bore you with it twice, so here's the angle I think is more interesting anyway. Primal reversion. In Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, when Groudon and Kyogre access their primal forms, the game is very careful about the language. They're not transforming into something new. They're not evolving or powering up. They're reverting, returning to what they originally were before the world settled down. And the mechanism for it is the part I find properly uncomfortable, because it isn't the Pokémon that decides. It's an object. The red orb and the blue orb are what trigger the reversion, and in the remakes those orbs are not neutral equipment. When Maxie and Archie get hold of them, the orbs take them over. The games are explicit about it. The two of them are not making decisions anymore by the end of that sequence, and they say so afterwards, visibly shaken as people who have just realised they were being driven. So the item that unlocks a legendary's original form is also an item that overwrites whoever's carrying it, which puts the whole awakening in a rather different light. Nobody in Hoenn chose to restart that argument. 2 men picked up rocks. Primal Groudon is also, incidentally, the only ground and fire type in the entire franchise, which is the sort of thing you'd expect to come up more often than it does. And there's a small thing about the pair of them that I don't think gets said enough, which is how they sleep. Groudon sleeps in magma. Kyogre sleeps in a trench at the bottom of the sea. Neither is imprisoned. There's no seal, no door, no puzzle, no key hidden inside 3 other Pokémon. They simply stopped and went to ground in the places that suit them, and they've been there ever since, which makes them the only major legendaries in the franchise whose dormancy was their own idea. Everything else we've talked about tonight was put somewhere by someone. Buried, banished, sealed behind braille, locked in a temple, crystallized underground by circumstance. Groudon and Kai Ogre fought until neither could continue, and then, of their own accord, lay down. And when Team Magma and Team Aqua turn up in the games and start drilling and diving to wake them, what they're actually doing is interrupting a truce that's held for an unknown span because both parties agreed to stop. Nobody in either organisation seems to have considered that the sleep might be load-bearing. Right, the Eon twins, Latios and Latios, are unusual in the roster because they're framed as a family unit rather than a force of nature. Not a domain, not an element, not a job. Two siblings. They're described as highly intelligent, capable of understanding human speech, and able to fold light around themselves to become invisible or to project images of what they've seen into someone else's mind. That last one is a genuinely lovely ability, incidentally. Not an attack, a way of showing you a memory. The Soul Dew is where it gets sad. It's an item described as being formed from the spirit of a Latios or Latius, and in the games it boosts the stats of whichever twin is holding it. So mechanically, you're strengthening one sibling with the remains of another. The games do not comment on this. It's just an item in your bag with a description that, if you read it slowly, is quite a lot to be carrying around. Southern Island, where you find them in the originals, is a small forested island with an inner clearing where you encounter them. It's not a dungeon. There's no puzzle. It's just an island that exists for one encounter, which I've always found slightly haunting in a way I can't fully justify. Jirachi next, and Jirachi has my favourite scheduling problem in the franchise. Jirachi sleeps for 1,000 years. Then it wakes up for 7 days. Then it goes back to sleep for another 1,000. That is the entire structure of its life. While it's asleep, it's wrapped in a hard, crystalline shell. And the games say that if you sing to it in a pure voice, it can be roused early. Though I'd question whether waking something that's 120 years into a millennium of sleep is really a kindness. During its 7 days, it can supposedly grant wishes written on the tags attached to its head. So the arithmetic. Approximately 0.002% of Jirachi's existence is spent awake. The rest is a shell in the ground. A wish-granting Pokémon whose primary characteristic is being almost entirely unavailable. There's something quite funny about the fact that the franchise built a creature around hope and generosity and then made its defining feature a diary conflict. And then Deoxys, which is where Hoenn goes properly strange. Deoxys is a virus from space. That's the origin. A virus that was in a meteor, mutated by a laser beam and became a creature. The name comes from deoxyribonucleic acid, which is about as unsubtle as the franchise gets. It has a crystalline organ in its chest that functions as a brain, and it changes form depending on which meteorite it interacts with. Attack, defense, speed, normal. 4 bodies, 1 creature, switched by rocks. 2 more small Hoenn things before we move on, both of which are about how you actually get to these creatures, rather than what they are. The sky pillar in Emerald has a floor made of cracked tiles that give way if you run on them. You have to walk. The entire ascent, every floor, at walking pace. And if you get impatient, you fall through and have to come back up. It's the only place in the game that punishes you for hurrying. And it happens to be the route to the only creature in the region that can stop a war. I doubt that's deliberate. I choose to enjoy it anyway. And in Ruby and Sapphire, one of the Eon twins roams. You pick a colour on a television screen at the start of the game, blue or red, and that determines which of the two is loose in the world, and then it moves around the region indefinitely, and you have to chase it. So the sibling you spend the game pursuing is decided by a question about a telly, which is either the most casual bit of design in the generation, or a very dry joke, and I've never worked out which. And I want to point out that this arrived in the same generation as a continent-raising fire god and a set of stone golems opened with Braille. Generation 3 did not have a house style. It had 4 or 5 house styles running simultaneously, and no interest in reconciling them. One more thing about Deoxys that I think is properly odd. For years its forms were split across the games. Fire Red gave you attack, Forme. Leaf Green gave you defense. Emerald gave you speed. Same Pokémon, same number in the Pokédex. Materially different creature, depending on which cartridge you happen to own. Nobody has ever explained that in universe, obviously, because it isn't an in-universe thing. But it does mean that for a good while, 2 people could have caught a Deoxys and be talking about different animals. Hoenn also has, tucked away in its corners, the strangest set of legendaries the franchise has ever produced. And they don't fit any of this. Different origin, different logic, different everything. Worth a proper stretch of their own, so let's do that. In 2002, to catch a Pokémon called Regirock, you had to be able to read Braille. Not metaphorically, not solve a puzzle that resembles Braille. The game rendered actual Braille on the walls of a chamber under the seafloor, and the instructions for what to do next were written in it. And if you couldn't read Braille, then you needed either a chart or a friend who had one. The chamber is called the Sealed Chamber, and getting into it requires a specific move, a specific item, and having already worked out that it exists. Once you're in, the Braille tells you to dig at a particular point, and doing so opens a second chamber. Arranging Relicanth and Wylord correctly opens 3 ruins scattered across Hoenn. Then at each ruin, more Braille, telling you to do things like walk 2 steps left and 2 steps down, and use a specific field move on nothing in particular. There is no in-game hint system for any of this. No NPC nudges you. It's a genuinely user-hostile bit of design in a game aimed at children, and it worked entirely because of magazines and playgrounds and the early internet. The information travelled through people, which honestly is a rather appropriate delivery method for a set of Pokémon whose entire lore is about knowledge being passed down and then getting lost. Now the lore itself, and I want to correct something that even fairly serious fans get wrong. Regigigas did not make 3 golems. It made 5. The stated materials are ice, rocks, magma, a cluster of electric energy, and crystallized dragon energy. Those became Regi-Ice, Regi-Rock, Regi-Steel, Regieleki, and Regidrago. The famous trio that everyone knows from Hoenn is a subset. There were always 2 more, and they turned up 18 years later in a completely different region, which we'll get to in due course. And here's the detail I find most interesting about those 2. Both of them are described as more powerful than the 3 you know about. Regieleki was fitted with special non-conductive equipment, specifically to limit what it could do. Regidrago was sealed away in ruins before Regigigas had finished building it. So the 2 strongest members of the set are the incomplete one and the one wearing restraints. Whatever the project was, it went wrong at the top end, and the response was to cap it and bury it, rather than start again. The Regis themselves are, as characters, almost nothing. They don't emote. They don't have motivations. Regirock repairs itself by finding new rocks when it takes damage, which is the closest any of them come to a personality trait, and it's why its body looks like a patchwork of mismatched stone. Regi-Ice's body is described as being made of ice from an ice age, and its Pokédex claims it's cold enough that it can't be melted even by fire. Regi-Steel's body is supposedly harder than any known metal and also flexible, which are 2 properties that don't usually go together. They have 7 dots arranged on their faces, and those dots are based on Braille, which I didn't clock for about 15 years despite having stared at them constantly. The pattern on each of them spells a letter. Regirock's is an H, Regi-Ice's an I, Regi-Steel's an X, which as far as I can tell doesn't spell anything on its own, and has kept people arguing for 2 decades. What actually happened to them is the interesting part, and it follows a shape you're going to notice again tonight. They lived alongside people. They were worshipped, genuinely, openly worshipped, as things of enormous significance. And then at some point, the people doing the worshipping got frightened of what they were worshipping and sealed all of them away in tombs and ruins and caves. That's it. That's the whole arc. No betrayal, no war, no incident. Reverence turned into fear, and the response to fear was burial. I keep waiting for the games to give me a reason, and they never do. And I've come round to thinking the absence of a reason is the reason. Regigigas got the same treatment, more or less, though it's less clear whether it was sealed or simply chose to stop. After creating the golems, according to an enduring Sinnoh legend, Regigigas hauled the landmasses of the world into position and lashed them together with ropes, which is a claim I've picked over elsewhere and won't relitigate now. What it did afterwards was go into Snowpoint Temple and fall asleep, behind a door locked by a puzzle, and it has been there ever since. And to open that door, you need the 3 golems. All 3 in your party at once. The keys to the master are the servants. The Braille inscriptions in the Hoenn ruins do not say this outright. It was sealed away, and its 3 creations must be gathered so that only someone who had already proven they could handle all 3 would be able to reach it. Which is a fairly elegant security system, if you think about it, and also an admission that whoever set it up expected someone to eventually come along and undo the whole thing. They weren't wrong. It took about 20 years and a lot of magazine scans, but somebody did. Regigigas also has, I think, the single best example in the games of a mechanic that is actually a piece of lore. Its ability is called Slow Start. For the first 5 turns of any battle, Regigigas fights at half its attack power and half its speed. It's a considerable handicap on a creature that otherwise has enormous raw numbers, and competitively, it's a disaster, and people have complained about it for the better part of 2 decades. But look at what it's describing. This is a thing that was asleep behind a locked door for centuries. You have just woken it up. It is not going to be at its best immediately. The Pokédex says the same thing in words, that when Regigigas is disturbed from its rest, it goes on a rampage and fires beams of energy, and also that it becomes calm and gentle if befriended. So the ability isn't a balanced decision that happens to have a story attached. It's the story, expressed in mechanics, and it makes the Pokémon worse to use on purpose. I have a lot of time for that. Most legendary Pokémon are strong because they're important. Regigigas is inconvenient because it's important, which is a braver design choice, and one nobody thanked them for. The design sourcing here is unusually clear for Pokémon. These are golems in the Hebrew sense, animated constructs made from raw material and given life by a maker, traditionally controlled by that maker and traditionally quite difficult to switch off. The prefix comes from the Latin reges, meaning royal, and the trio maps neatly onto ages of human material culture, which I don't think is accidental. Stone, ice, iron, Regi-Rock, Regi-Ice, Regi-Steel. A rough sequence of what people have made things out of. Regigigas being able to control the giants even when they belong to a trainer is a nice touch too. You can catch them. You can raise them. They're still not really yours. My honest reaction to the Reges, having sat with them for a long time, is that they're the legendaries with the least personality and by some distance the most disturbing implication. Everything else in this video is a god, or an animal, or a consequence. These are equipment. Somebody built 5 tools, 2 of them turned out to be more than could be safely handled, and the solution was to lock the toolbox and hide the key inside 3 other tools. And the people who did the locking were the same people who used to leave offerings. One last thing about the naming, because it's a small oddity that I only noticed recently. The Regis are one of the legendary groups in the entire franchise that share a name prefix. Some other trios or quartets have related names. Articuno and Zapdos and Moltres have their own separate constructions. Dialga and Palkia and Giratina share nothing. Even the Treasures of Ruin, which we'll get to, are named on a consistent system, but not a shared stem. The Regis are just Regi, plus what they're made of. Regi Rock, Regi Ice, Regi Steel, Regi Aleki from Electric, Regi Drago from Dragon. That's not mythological naming. That's how you label stock. It's how a workshop names things or a catalogue, and given everything else about them, I don't think it can be an accident. Nobody in the story gave them names in the sense of choosing one. They were designated, and their maker's name, Regi Gigas, follows the same pattern with Gigas on the end, meaning giant, which puts the master in the same catalogue as the equipment it made. Sinnoh next, which is where the franchise stopped being coy about the fact that it had a religion. Right, I need to be upfront about something. Sinnoh has the most developed cosmology in the franchise by a wide margin, and I've already made an entire video about it. The egg in the chaos, Arceus, the trio that governs time and space and antimatter, the whole thing sitting on library shelves in Canalave that most players walk straight past. If you want that, it's there, and I'd genuinely rather not repeat 2 hours of it at you now. So instead, tonight, I want to talk about the ones that video didn't have room for. Because Sinnoh has an enormous supporting cast of legendaries that get almost no attention, and several of them are lovely, starting with the Lake Guardians, but briefly, and from a different angle. Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf live in the 3 major lakes of the region and represent knowledge, emotion, and willpower. That's the famous part. The part I want to point at is what happens when you catch them, which is nothing. There's no reward, no door opens, no item appears. Catching all 3 of the beings that supposedly gave conscious life the ability to know and feel and choose gets you exactly the same acknowledgement as catching a Bidoof. The games treat them as a duty rather than a prize. You go because they're there and because something happened to them during the story and you feel some obligation to check. I find that quietly appropriate. Heatran though. Heatran is the one nobody talks about, and it's genuinely strange. Heatran lives in Stark Mountain, inside an active volcano, and its body is described as being made of rough metal that's partly melted and reformed. It has feet shaped like crosses, and those feet let it dig into rock, which means Heatran doesn't just walk on the floor of caves, it walks on the walls and the ceilings. There's a Pokédex entry that specifies it can cling upside down to cave roofs, which is not an image I associate with a legendary Pokémon, and is now permanently in my head. But the actual oddity is this: Heatran has a gender, not a single fixed one. A normal 50-50 split, male or female, the same as a Bidoof or a Starly. Every other legendary in the franchise is either genderless or locked to one, and there are usually reasons why. Heatran just has an ordinary gender ratio, and nobody has ever explained it, in-game or out. It sits there in the data like a typo that turned out to be intentional. I have no theory. I've read the theories, none of them are convincing. It's just true and it's just weird. Cresselia and Darkrai are a proper pair, and the story attached to them is small and good. There's a boy in Canalave City who won't wake up. He's trapped in a nightmare, and his father is beside himself, and the solution involves sailing to Full Moon Island and finding Cresselia, who leaves behind a lunar wing. Bring the wing back, the nightmares stop, the boy wakes up. That's a genuinely nice little quest, and it's optional, and a lot of players never do it. The nightmares are coming from Darkrai, who lives on New Moon Island nearby. And the thing about Darkrai that I think gets lost under all the fan art of it being the franchise's edgelord is that its Pokédex entries are quite insistent that it doesn't mean it. Darkrai causes nightmares, in people who are near it. That's not an attack. It's not a choice. It's an effect of proximity, the way you'd get cold standing next to something very cold. Several entries specifically state that it isn't trying to cause harm, and that it acts to protect itself when threatened. One entry describes it as being able to lull people into deep sleep and give them nightmares, and the framing across the series is closer to unfortunate side effect than malice. So you've got two creatures on two adjacent islands. One of them makes people dream badly by existing. The other one makes an object that fixes it, and the game just leaves them there, a short boat ride apart, doing their opposite things forever without any narrative attached. Shaman is the sweetest thing in this entire video, and I want that on record. Shaman is described as gratitude given physical form. That's the concept. Its whole ability set revolves around cleaning up pollution and turning wasteland back into flowers. When a large number of shaman gather in one place, they can dissolve toxins in the air. Its sky form, unlocked by the Grassidea flower, is faster and lighter and looks like a small dog that's very pleased about something. And I want to note how peculiar it is that this exists in the same regional roster as a dragon of antimatter that was banished at the start of the universe for being constitutionally dangerous. Sinnoh contains a being made of thankfulness and a being made of the physics concept that annihilates matter on contact. Both are legendary. Different categories. Manaphy is the one that breaks the category outright. Manaphy is a mythical Pokémon, and Manaphy can breed. Put it in a daycare with a compatible partner and you get an egg, and out of that egg comes Phione. Not another Manaphy. Phione, a lesser version, which is itself sometimes considered legendary and sometimes not, depending on who you ask and which official document you're reading, which means Manaphy is the only member of this entire 2-hour list that isn't unique. You can have as many as you like. Given enough patience, the rarest classification in the games contains one creature that has a reproductive cycle you can run in a shed. Nobody at Game Freak has ever seemed troubled by this. It's fine. It's just there. And then briefly, the plates. Because I do want to say one thing about Arceus that I didn't fit into the other video. Arceus is normal type. Everyone knows this and everyone treats it as a joke, but Arceus can hold plates, and there are 18 of them, and each one changes its type. Which means Arceus is the only Pokémon in the games that can be any type in existence, one at a time, by picking up an object. Read that way. Normal isn't a punchline. Normal is the state it's in when it isn't holding anything. It's the blank. Type for Arceus is a costume, and the default is no costume at all. There's a very old alchemical idea underneath that, I think. The thing that gives matter its form and direction doesn't itself have a form. It borrows one. There's also the Azure Flute, which is the best unresolved story in Sinnoh, and has nothing to do with mythology at all. Diamond and Pearl contain a fully programmed item called the Azure Flute. Playing it at the spear pillar opens a staircase made of light, and climbing that staircase takes you to a place called the Hall of Origin, and at the top of the Hall of Origin is Arceus. All of that is in the game. The item works. The staircase renders. The location exists and is finished. The encounter is coded. The Azure Flute was never distributed. Not once, anywhere in the world, in any official capacity. Arceus was eventually handed out at events as a straightforward gift Pokémon, transferred directly onto your cartridge, which meant you got the creature without ever going to the place. The staircase stayed shut. Nobody has ever given a clear reason. The most commonly repeated explanation is that the sequence was considered too confusing for players, which, given that this is the same franchise that made me read Braille to open a tomb, I struggle to fully accept. So there is a room in Diamond and Pearl at the top of a staircase made of light, containing the creator of the universe, and the only intended way to reach it was through an item that was built, finished, tested, and then simply not given to anybody. It's still in there. People access it with hacked flutes and it works perfectly, exactly as designed. I find that quietly remarkable. The most elaborate encounter in the game, complete and functional, sealed off by a decision made in an office. Which, if you wanted to be neat about it, is almost exactly what happens to half the creatures in this video. Somebody built a thing, and then somebody else decided nobody should get to it. Anyway. Unova next, which is the first generation where the legendaries have an argument rather than a domain. I want to start with Kyurem, which is out of order, but Kyurem is the one that makes the other two make sense. And I think approaching it backwards is more interesting. Kyurem is a dragon made of leftovers. Its body is described as being full of holes. It leaks. Whatever energy it has spills out of it constantly, and that leaking energy is what makes the surrounding area freeze, which is why it lives in a place called Giant Chasm, and why everything around it is covered in ice. The cold isn't its power. The cold is its power escaping, and the reason it's like that is the region's founding myth, which goes like this. There was one dragon once, belonging to two brothers, who ruled Unova together. The brothers disagreed, not about territory or resources, but about the nature of right action. One of them sought truth, meaning the reality of things as they actually are. The other sought ideals, meaning the vision of what things ought to become. The dragon couldn't serve both, so it split. Reshiram went to the brother who wanted truth. Zekrom went to the brother who wanted ideals. They fought, exhausted each other, and eventually stopped. Kyurem is what didn't go to either brother. And there's a second Unova legend running alongside that one, which I think is the more interesting of the two because it doesn't involve the brothers at all. It says Kyurem fell out of the sky in a meteor and landed where the Giant Chasm is now. Both accounts are in circulation in the region, and neither is confirmed. So depending on who you ask, Kyurem is either the leftover of the region's founding dragon, or a thing that arrived from space and has nothing to do with any of it, and the games have never picked. Its Pokédex adds a line I keep coming back to, which is that Kyurem is said to be waiting for a hero to arrive and fill in the missing parts of its body. That's not a threat, that's an advertisement. Whatever it is, it knows it's incomplete, and its stated position on that is that it would like somebody to do something about it. Black Kyurem and White Kyurem are where I start feeling slightly uncomfortable, and I mean that as a compliment. In Black 2 and White 2 there's an item called the DNA Splicers, and it lets you fuse Kyurem with either Reshiram or Zekrom. The result is a larger, stronger creature with a mixed appearance. Mechanically, it's a straightforward power-up. Narratively, it's forcing the incomplete thing back toward completion by taking one of the halves and cramming it into the whole. It isn't reunification. The dragon isn't being made whole again. 2/3 of a thing are being pressed together, while the third piece stands somewhere else. And the item that does it is called the DNA Splicers, which is about as clinical a name as you could pick. Getzes uses this. That's how he plans to freeze the region and take it. I'm not going to go through the whole Team Plasma story here, because I've done it at length before, and the short version is that a man raised a child to be a mouthpiece. The child became a person instead, and it ruined him. What matters for tonight is that his last plan involved taking the emptiness at the centre of the region's mythology and using it as a weapon. Right? The Swords of Justice, who I love, and who nobody ever mentions. Cobalion, Terrakion, and Veritzion are 3 legendary Pokémon who, according to Unova's history, fought against humans. Not alongside them, against them. There was a fire, or a war depending on the telling, that destroyed a forest and killed a great many Pokémon living in it, and the 3 of them stood up on behalf of those Pokémon and went after the people responsible. That is the only legendary group in the franchise whose stated motivation is explicitly anti-human, and the games are entirely relaxed about it. Nobody frames them as villains. They're called the Swords of Justice. The justice in question was directed at people, and the games think that was correct. Given that Unova is also the generation that stopped to ask whether keeping Pokémon in balls is defensible at all, I don't think that's a coincidence. Keldeo is the fourth member, and my favourite bit of legendary trivia in this whole stretch, because Keldeo has to do homework. Keldeo is the youngest of the four, described as a colt, learning from the other three. And to access its resolute form and learn its signature move, Secret Sword, you have to take it to a specific location with the other three Swords of Justice in your party and have it learn the move from them. That is a graduation ceremony, an actual in-game requirements-based graduation ceremony for a legendary Pokémon. Every other creature in this video was born fully formed or made in a lab. Keldeo has to be taught by its seniors in a particular place, and until it has been, it isn't finished. The forces of nature are Tornadus, Thundurus and Landorus, and they're based on Tengu, which explains a great deal about their design and their behaviour. Tornadus and Thundurus roam about causing storms and, according to their entries, quite a lot of property damage. They fly around in what amounts to a cloud. They're described as violent, and there's an old legend attached in which the two of them fought so destructively across the land that people suffered badly for it. And then Landorus arrives. Landorus is the one who turns up afterwards, and where it goes, the soil becomes rich. It's explicitly called the Guardian of the Fields, and its whole function is that the aftermath of a storm is fertility. That's not a Pokémon idea. That's a straightforwardly agricultural idea of the sort you find in a lot of farming cultures. The storm is destructive, and the storm is also why anything grows. Two gods wrecking the place, and a third one who makes the wreckage useful. And there's a fourth one, which arrived 12 years late, and in a completely different region. And Namorous turned up in Legends Arceus, set in ancient Hisui, which is Sinnoh before it was Sinnoh. It's fairy and flying, it's based on the same Tengu design language as the other three, and it completes the set. Its function is spring. And Amorous crosses the sea in winter and brings the thaw with it, and where it passes, dormant plants wake up and grow, which slots into the group logic rather beautifully. You've got two that wreck the place, one that makes the wreckage fertile, and one that decides when the growing season starts. What I like most is the placement. The forces of nature are Unova's legendaries, and Namorous lives in a region on the other side of the world in a period centuries before the games we know. It's not explained. The four of them are clearly a set, and they are not in the same place or the same century, and nobody involved seems to think that requires comment. Its other form is called Therian, same as the others, and it's a serpent rather than a humanoid. There's a small sting in the Pokédex too, which notes that its temper is as changeable as its power is generous. A creature that brings spring and is also difficult, which, if you've ever lived through a British March, is about right. Victini I'll do quickly. Victini is victory as a creature. It generates unlimited energy and shares it with whoever it touches, and the legend says that any trainer with a Victini will win, always, which is a rather boring superpower narratively, but a lovely bit of Pokémon logic. And it lives on an island with a lighthouse and a hidden underground chamber, which is a nicer home than most of these get. Meloetta sings, and the songs change the emotional state of whoever hears them. It has two forms tied to two musical styles, and switching between them changes its typing. That's essentially all there is, but I'd point out that a legendary whose power is that its music makes you feel things is a very unglamorous piece of divinity, and I find it charming. Genesect is the one that ought to get more attention than it does. Genesect is a fossil Pokémon, roughly 300 million years old, described as the strongest hunter of its era. Team Plasma dug it up, brought it back, and then modified it. Specifically, they bolted a cannon to its back. So that's the second explicitly man-modified legendary after Mewtwo, and it barely registers in the conversation, presumably because it was distributed at cinemas rather than being anyone's box art. but the shape is identical. A creature with an existence of its own, taken and altered by an organisation that wanted a weapon. 2 down in that particular lineage. There are more coming. Carlos next, which handles life and death by simply handing them to specific animals. Xerneas, when it is not being a deer, is a tree. I mean that literally. At the end of its active period, Xerneas takes the form of a tree and sleeps for 1,000 years. Not near a tree, as one. The horns become branches and it stands there, dormant for a millennium, and then it wakes up and shares eternal life with whatever's around it. Yveltal does the opposite, and does it on exactly the same timetable. When Yveltal reaches the end of its life, it absorbs the life force of every living thing around it, then becomes a cocoon and sleeps for 1,000 years, and then it wakes up. 2 creatures, opposite functions, identical sleep cycle. One gives life away and rests. One takes life and rests. That symmetry is the entire design, and I think it's one of the tidiest things the franchise has ever done. There's no story attached to either of them in X and Y. No war, no betrayal, no lost civilization. They just are what they are, and they do it on a schedule. The detail I keep coming back to is that both of them sleep the same length of time, which means somewhere out there, in principle, the giving and the taking are happening in alternation forever, and nobody's keeping score. Zygarde is the third of the set, and I'm going to be honest about Zygarde, which is that for about 11 years, it was the least developed third legendary in the entire franchise. In X and Y, Zygarde sits in a cave called Terminus Cave. That's it. You beat the game, you go to the cave, it's there, you catch it. No story, no cutscene, a couple of Pokédex entries saying it watches over the ecosystem and reveals its power when the balance of things is disturbed. Compare that to the other thirds. Rayquaza got Emerald, Giratina got Platinum, Kyurem got 2 sequel games, Necrozma got Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, Zygarde got a cave. Sun and Moon fleshed it out slightly, introducing the cells and cores scattered around the region, and 2 of the 3 main forms, 10% Zygarde, which is the dog-looking one, 50% the serpent, and Complete Former, which is enormous and looks like a humanoid figure with a fanned-out chest. Those 3 shapes map rather neatly onto the children of Loki in Norse mythology, Fenrir the wolf, Jörmungandr the serpent, and Hel, who is humanoid. Whether that was intentional, I genuinely don't know, but the correspondence is clean enough that it's hard to ignore. The cells are the part I actually like, mind you. In Sun and Moon, Zygarde isn't a Pokémon you find in a place. It's 100 separate pieces scattered across 4 islands, and you collect them one at a time. And depending on how many you've gathered, you can assemble different forms at a machine, which makes Zygarde one of the few legendaries in the franchise that you build rather than catch in its initial acquisition in Sun and Moon. There's no encounter, there's no ball, there's a scientist with a device and a jar of parts, and at some point there's enough of it to be a creature. And the cells are alive while they're scattered. They're described as being aware, watching, spread out across the environment, gathering information about the state of things. So the reason it can react when the ecosystem is disturbed isn't that it's sitting somewhere listening, it's that it's already everywhere in pieces and it only assembles when it has to. That's a much better idea than a dragon in a cave. It just took them a couple of games to get there. There's one more Carlos loose end that's been sitting unresolved for over a decade, and it's a small one. Azed's Floetta holds a black flower, and that specific Floette has its own form in the game's data, separate from the ordinary ones. Eternal Flower Floette. It has stats, it has a sprite. It was never obtainable in any game, through any event, anywhere in the world, until it was finally distributed as a post-game gift in Pokémon Legends. Z-Day. Everybody assumed it was being saved for something. It sat there in the code for 12 years while people made theories about it. And then in October of 2025, ZA finally got a game with its name in the title, which brings us to AZ, and I need to handle this carefully, because AZ's backstory is one of the things I've covered most thoroughly elsewhere. The very short version for anyone who hasn't seen it. 3,000 years ago, a king in Kalos lost his Floette to a war, built a machine to bring her back, succeeded, then turned that machine into a weapon and fired it, and she left him. Both of them immortal, one of them alone, wandering ever since. That's the version everyone knows, and X and Y end with her coming back to him after 3 millennia. Legends ZA, which came out in October 2025, is set in modern Lumiose City, and it does something I did not expect. It gives him an ending. AZ runs a hotel, Hotel Z, in the middle of Lumiose. He's the owner. He stands over 9 feet tall and quietly claims to be 3,000 years old, and he's still accompanied by his Floette with her black flower, and he checks people in. That's what he does now. And the central problem of that game is a device called Angie, which AZ built 2,000 years ago inside Prism Tower, and which became unstable because of what Team Flare did with the ultimate weapon in the previous game. So the crisis of the new game is the aftershock of the crisis of the old game, which is itself the aftershock of the war that started all of it. Consequences reaching forward across an absurd span, which is very much the Kalos house style. My honest opinion on the hotel, and I've gone back and forth on this, a 3,000-year tragedy about grief and mass death resolving into hospitality management is either the most perfect ending imaginable or completely absurd, and I've settled on the position that it's both at once. He spent 30 centuries with nowhere to be. Now he has a front desk. There are worse outcomes. Right, the Kalos Mythicals, which are a strange little group. Diancie is a carbink that mutated. That's the actual stated origin. Carbink is a common rock and fairy type you can catch in caves without much effort, and every so often, apparently, one of them changes into something else. Diancie can compress carbon in the air between its hands and produce diamonds instantly, which makes Diancie functionally an extremely rare variant of an ordinary Pokémon that got promoted to mythical. It's the only member of the classification I can think of that has a common ancestor you can catch in a cave 20 minutes into the game. Hooper is a djinn, rings on its horns and around its body, and those rings warp space. Put something in one ring, it comes out of another somewhere else entirely. Its Pokédex describes it stealing things and hiding them, which is a very traditional trickster arrangement. And Hooper has 2 forms, which is where the prison bottle comes in. Hooper Unbound is the larger 6-armed version, and 100 years ago it went on a rampage and was sealed into the bottle to stop it. The bottle both contains it, and in the games is the item you use to release that form on purpose. The seal is also the switch. Hooper came back in December 2025 in the Mega Dimension expansion for Legends CA, opening portals into something the game calls Hyperspace Lumiose, which is a version of the city that isn't quite the city. You get there by feeding it donuts, which is a sentence I did not expect to say tonight. But the donut mechanic is real, and it awakens its power, and I've decided I like it. Volcanion is the last one, and the simplest. It's the only fire and water type in the entire franchise, which sounds like a contradiction, and is resolved by the fact that Volcanion runs on steam. It has arms on its back that vent it, and the Pokédex says the pressure is sufficient to blow away a mountain, a legendary powered by a boiler. One small thing before we leave Kalos. The energy that the ultimate weapon ran on now has an official name. It's called Infinity Energy, and it was named by Stephen Stone's father, the president of Devon Corporation, in the Hone remakes, which quietly connects a 3,000-year-old Kalos atrocity to a technology firm on the other side of the world that's busy studying it. Nobody in the games seems bothered. They rarely are. Alola next, and Alola is where the legendaries get an actual religion. The Tapus are the only legendary Pokémon in the franchise with an active, ongoing, uncontroversial religion attached to them, and I think that's underappreciated. Every other legendary we've talked about tonight is either forgotten, sealed, mythologized into unrecognizability, or living at the bottom of the sea, specifically to avoid people. The Tapus are worshipped right now by people who are alive in ruins that are maintained as part of a culture that hasn't lapsed. The island challenge that structures the whole game exists partly in relation to them. They're not history, they're civic. There are 4. Tapu Koko on Melemele, Tapu Lele on Akala, Tapu Bulu on Ula Ula, and Tapu Fini on Pony. 1 per island, each in a ruin, each with a distinct temperament that the game is quite specific about. Tapu Koko is curious and likes fighting. It's described as forgetful, which is a strange thing to say about a deity, and it turns up early in the story to hand you a stone and then vanishes. Tapu Lele scatters scales that heal wounds, and the entries note, without much comment, that it does this without any concern for whether the person being healed is in the middle of something dangerous. Its kindness is indiscriminate to the point of being a hazard. Tapu Bulu is slow and territorial and controls vegetation. Tapu Fini is associated with mist and with the ability to purify water, and its mist causes people who enter it to see illusions. And the word the games keep using about all 4 of them is capricious. Not benevolent, not protective, capricious. They guard their islands, yes, and they're also unpredictable and easily annoyed and act on their own logic. That's a much more accurate rendering of how actual guardian deities tend to work in actual mythology than the friendly protector version you might expect, and I appreciate that Alola committed to it. Cosmog is the saddest Pokédex entry in the generation, and it's on a creature that looks like a small cloud with eyes. Cosmog is not from here. It comes from another world, arriving as a wisp of gas, and it is essentially defenseless. It has no attacks worth mentioning. Its entry says that because it's so weak, it's frequently used and abused by people who get hold of it. That's the wording. A legendary Pokémon whose Pokédex entry warns you that it gets exploited. Then it becomes Cosmom, which is dense to an almost silly degree. A small sphere weighing about 200 kilograms that does nothing at all and cannot move. And then it becomes either Solgaleo or Lunala, a beast of the sun, or a bat of the moon, both of which can open holes between dimensions. So the arc is gas, then rock, then God. And in the middle of it, the game tells you that people take advantage of the first stage, which is exactly what the story of Sun and Moon is about. Lily's whole plot is getting one out of her mother's reach before something is done to it. Necrozma I've gone through properly elsewhere, so I'll stay on the one bit that belongs in a video about legendaries specifically, which is what it does to the other 2. Necrozma fuses, not with an ordinary Pokémon, and not with an item, with Solgaleo or with Lunala, producing Duskmane or Dawnwings, and from there into Ultra Necrozma. That makes it the only creature in the franchise that takes another legendary as a component, which is a category all by itself. Kyurem borrows a dragon, Calyrex borrows a horse. Necrozma is the only one where the thing being absorbed is a sun or a moon, and Legends ZA has started gesturing at connections between Necrozma and Zygarde that I don't think anybody predicted, which is a thread still being pulled. Type Null is the 3rd entry in the lineage I flagged earlier, and it's the most upsetting of them. Type Null was built by the Ether Foundation. Its purpose was stated plainly in the internal documentation. It was designed as a weapon to fight Ultra Beasts. The project name was, in some materials, the Beast Killer. It's a chimera, assembled from parts of multiple different species, combined to give it the ability to change type by holding memory disks. And because the resulting creature couldn't handle its own power, they fitted it with a mask. A heavy control helmet bolted over its head, limiting what it could do and, as the entries note, restricting its senses. You get one because Gladion has one and gives it to you, and it evolves into Silvally when its friendship is high enough, at which point the mask breaks off. Not removed. Breaks. The thing was never designed to come off. So, Mewtwo, made from Mew in a lab. Genesect, dug up and fitted with a cannon. Type, null, assembled from spare species, and masked. 3 separate generations, 3 separate organisations, all doing more or less the same thing, and all of them producing something classified as legendary. I said I'd stop flagging it, and I will after this, but 3 is a pattern rather than a coincidence. Morgana is the 4th, and it's the one that's actually about something. Morgana was built roughly 500 years ago by a scientist as a gift for a king's daughter. It's a mechanical Pokémon, obviously mechanical, gears and spheres, and a body that folds up into a shape resembling a Pokeball when it sleeps, or when it's sad. But the body isn't the point. The body is a vessel. Morgana's actual self is the sphere in its chest called the soul heart, and the soul heart is described as an artificial soul. And here's how it was made. The scientists created it by gathering the life energy of Pokémon, which is a slightly darker gift than it first appears, isn't it? A princess was given a companion whose capacity to feel was assembled out of the vitality of other living things. And the thing it can do, the ability the games give it, is perceive the emotions and pain of other Pokémon, and it will work relentlessly to help any that are suffering. So the soul made out of donated life is unusually sensitive to what other lives are going through. That tracks in a way I don't entirely want to think about. The colour thing gets me every time. Morgana's default appearance is silver and pale blue, unremarkable metal. Its original colour form, which is gold and red and heavily decorated, is what it actually looked like when it was presented at court. The silver isn't its colour. It's the paint having worn off over 5 centuries. You're not looking at a machine. You're looking at a machine that's been left somewhere a long time. The design roots are lovely too. Morgana is drawn from Edo period karakuri, the Japanese clockwork automata that could serve tea or fire tiny arrows, which were expensive enough to be almost exclusively toys for the very rich. And the kingdom it came from in the film is named after alchemical concepts, with characters named for Flamel and Paracelsus. Somebody did their reading? There's a classification problem in Alola that I want to poke at, which is the Ultra Beasts. I've talked about where the Ultra Beasts come from elsewhere, so I'll leave that alone. What I didn't get into is that most of them are formally classified as legendary Pokémon, which is odd because they don't behave like any other legendary. There isn't one of each, there are groups of them. They have code names rather than proper names when you first meet them. UB, Saiwan and so on, assigned by researchers who had no idea what they were dealing with. They arrive through holes. They're an ecological event rather than a mythological one. And the franchise filed them alongside creatures that made the fabric of reality. Poipole is the one that breaks it entirely. Poipole is an Ultra Beast that evolves into Naganadel by learning a particular move. So there's a legendary evolutionary line now, alongside the one Khufu opens up. And both of them arrived within about 2 years of each other, after 20 years of the category, meaning does not evolve, there is only one. Do not ask questions. I don't think that's a mistake. I think the category was always doing more work than it could bear, and Alola is where it finally gave up pretending. Legendary in Pokémon has never meant divine or ancient or singular. It means the game has decided this one is a big deal, and the reasons vary enormously, which in fairness is roughly how the word works in ordinary use too. Marshadow and Zorora I'll do quickly. Marshadow lives in shadows, can slip into a person's or a Pokémon's shadow and read what they're feeling from inside it, and is described as extremely shy. Zeraora is a fast electric creature that generates its own current from its pores and doesn't have much lore at all beyond being quick and quite cross about things. Gala next. Britain, essentially, with wolves. I want to skip past the box art entirely for a moment and start with a deposed monarch who lives in a garden. Calyrex is small. That's the first thing that throws people. It's a pale green creature, about the size of a rabbit, with an enormous crown-shaped growth on its head. And it's called the King Pokémon. And when you first meet it, it's not remotely impressive. Its story is the one I find most affecting in the region. A long time ago, Calyrex arrived in the Crown Tundra, weak and afraid. The accounts say it reacted with fear when people opened their palms toward it. So the people closed their palms, so it would feel safe, which is a startlingly precise little detail to put in a legend. Somebody thought about how to be non-threatening to a frightened animal and adjusted. They nursed it back to health, and in gratitude, Calyrex turned the frozen ground of the tundra into rich, workable soil, an area that became known as the Crown Plains, and it made it possible for people to actually live and farm there. So they called it King, and they worshipped it, and they built pedestals across the region with its story carved into them. And then, over time, people stopped believing. Not through any betrayal, it just faded the way things do. The story became a legend, the legend became a folktale, and the folktale became a wooden statue in a village that somebody's using bits of as a pillow. And as the belief faded, so did Calyrex's power, until it had lost control of its own steed and could barely manage the crops anymore. That's a legendary whose strength is literally a function of whether anyone remembers it, not metaphorically. The games state it outright. Nobody thinks about Calyrex, so Calyrex can't do anything. The steed is the other half, and the steed is furious. Depending on which carrot you grow, you get Glastria or Spectria. Ice Root in fresh snow gives you the Ice Horse. Shade Root by the graves gives you the Ghost. And whichever one shows up does not arrive gently. It bolts straight into the village and starts wrecking the place. And when you battle it, the game is clear that you're not winning. You're annoying it. It gets angrier, notices the villagers standing to one side and goes for them. And it's only Calyrex making a psychic connection that turns it away. Glastria's Pokédex says it takes anything it wants by force, and that the mask of ice over its face is 100 times harder than diamond. That's not a partner, that's a thing that used to be under management. The reconciliation is a piece of tack. You take a tuft of mane hair left behind in the carnage and a radiant petal that Calyrex produces, and Peony makes the reins of unity out of them. Then at the Crown Shrine where Calyrex used to reign, you put a carrot in a basket in the old stable, and the horse comes for it, and Calyrex climbs on. A king regaining his throne by luring his own horse with a vegetable. I have no notes, it's perfect. Zacian, Zamazenta, and Eternatus. I've gone through in detail before, so here's the short form, and then the bit I want to sit on. Something arrived in a meteor, woke up, started absorbing all available energy to sustain itself, and the byproduct made wild Pokémon grow enormous. 2 wolves sealed it. That was the darkest day. There's a lovely, mechanical touch buried in the wolves that people miss because it happens in a menu. Zacian and Zamazenta, when you first fight them, don't have their weapons. Zacian is a wolf. Zamazenta is a wolf. That's it. And in the post-game, if you find the rusted sword or the rusted shield, you can give one to the relevant wolf, and it changes form permanently. Zacian picks the sword up in its mouth. Zamazenta's shield unfolds around it. The items are called rusted, and they look it. They're not gleaming relics. They're corroded lumps that have been sitting in a hut in the slumbering weald for centuries, because nobody knew what they were, and one of them is being kept by an old man who mostly seems confused about it. So the legendary weapons of the region's founding catastrophe were, in the intervening period, downgraded to junk. Somebody had them in a cupboard. I love that more than I can properly justify. The bit I want to sit on is the forgetting. After the sealing, both of them went into a forest and turned to stone, and stayed that way for so long that the region stopped counting them as real. What they turned into instead was a pair of nouns, a sword and a shield, That's the whole of what survived into the modern Galar imagination, and it's why the games are called what they're called, and it's why the region's iconography is full of blades and crests and not full of wolves. And their signature moves make the joke complete. Zacian has Behemoth Blade. Zamazenta has Behemoth Bash. The two of them are the only Pokémon that get them, and the moves are, in effect, the legend being handed back to the creatures it was taken from. Zacian's sword, according to its entries, cuts through anything. Zamazenta's shield turns aside any attack. Between them, they are the two most absolute statements the Pokédex makes about anything, and for several centuries the region attributed both of them to a couple of blokes. One thing about Eternatus I do want to add, because it's the same trick Paldea would pull later, and Gala got there first. Dynamax is the region's battle mechanic, the thing everybody built their team around, the giant Pokémon in the stadiums, the whole spectacle of the Gala League. It is, in universe, entirely a side effect of Eternatus. The energy Eternatus absorbs and radiates is what makes wild Pokémon grow enormous. That's the darkest day. That's the power spots dotted across the wild area. That's the reason the gyms have those enormous pitches in the first place. The national sport of Galar is played inside the fallout of a meteor. And when Eternatus goes to its full form, Eternamax, it's rendered at a scale the games have never used before or since. It doesn't fit on the screen properly. Its stat total is the highest of any Pokémon ever, by an absurd margin, and you cannot obtain that form. You fight it, you knock it down to something catchable, and the version that goes in your box is the reduced one. Which is that Hoenn pattern again, isn't it? The thing you get to keep is never the thing you actually met. Gala is also where the other two golems finally showed up, which closes the loop I opened earlier. Regieleki and Regidrago are in the Crown Tundra, sealed in ruins, which is exactly where I'd have put them given who made them and how that whole project went. The ruins are opened by playing specific notes, which is a nicer puzzle than counting steps in the desert, but comes from the same design instinct. And the pair of them being the powerful ones, one restrained and one unfinished, sitting in a region 18 years and several continents away from their siblings, is the sort of long game the franchise plays occasionally and rarely gets credit for. Kubfu is the odd one out in this entire video, because Kubfu is a legendary you raise. You get given it as a small bear. It has one form, one type, and a modest stat spread. And to evolve it into Urshifu, you take it to one of two towers on the Isle of Armor and climb. And at the top, it becomes either the single strike style or the rapid strike style, depending on which tower you chose. You cannot do both. The choice is permanent in that save file. That's a completely different relationship than every other legendary here. You aren't catching a god or unsealing a weapon. You're training an apprentice, and the shape it takes is a decision you made. I got rapid strike for what it's worth, and I've regretted it ever since in a low-level way that I think about more than is reasonable. The martial arts framing, 2 schools, 2 philosophies, a student who has to commit, is unusual for the franchise, and I wish they'd done more with it. And finally, the Galarian birds, which are the strangest unexplained thing in modern Pokémon, and almost nobody talks about it. Articuno, Zapdos and Moltres turn up in the Crown Tundra as completely different creatures. Galarian Articuno is psychic and flying, and it's arrogant and manipulative, controlling minds with psychic pressure. Galarian Zapdos is fighting and flying, and it doesn't really fly at all, it runs and kicks. Galarian Moltres is dark and flying, and it emits a sinister aura that wears down the spirit of anyone nearby. Different types, different temperaments, different design language, and no explanation whatsoever. Regional forms elsewhere have reasons. A lowland Pokémon adapted to island conditions. Hisuian forms responded to a different environment over a long time. These 3 just exist, in a region they don't come from, behaving nothing like their counterparts, and the game does not offer a single line about how or why. For a franchise that will happily write 3 paragraphs about a Rabbit King's soil management, that silence is genuinely conspicuous. Right, Paldea, which went and made all of it about objects. A merchant came from the east with 4 objects. And that's where this one starts. Not a war, not a god, not a meteor. A trader arriving in ancient Paldea, carrying 4 things. A set of wooden tablets, a sword, a large ritual vessel, and a set of beads. He presented them to the king of the region, who was, by every account the game gives you, obsessed with treasure. The king bought all 4 immediately and put them in his castle with the rest of his collection. The objects had already been through a great many hands before they got there, and along the way each of them had absorbed something. Not magic exactly. Emotion. Specific named emotions, 1 per object. Grudge in the tablets, hatred in the sword, fear in the vessel, envy in the beads, and under the king's greed they woke up. The tablets clad themselves in dead leaves and became Wochien. The sword wrapped itself in snow and ice and became Chien Pao. The vessel took on dirt and rock and became Ting Lu. The beads took on fire and became Chi Yu. 4 Pokémon made out of 4 objects and 4 feelings, standing in a treasury. They destroyed the castle in a single night. Then they went out into the kingdom and very nearly finished the job on that too. The detail that turns this from a monster story into something better is the tablets. Wochien's grudge belongs to a specific person. The tablets were used to record the king's crimes, and whoever did the recording was punished for it. The resentment that gave those tablets life is the resentment of someone who told the truth and suffered for it, which means these aren't 4 monsters that attacked a king. They're 4 consequences of what the king was. He collected them himself. He paid for them. The disaster that levelled his castle was assembled piece by piece out of things people felt about him. They were eventually put down by a group of trainers he called together and sealed into 4 shrines scattered across the region, each held shut by 8 stakes driven into the ground somewhere in the surrounding countryside. 32 stakes in total, and pulling them all is entirely optional. Most players never do. I did, over about 3 evenings, and I would not describe the experience as fun so much as thorough. The 4 perils of Chinese mythology are sitting fairly obviously underneath all this, and Paldea is a region that thinks about history properly, so I doubt that's accidental. Since we're on the subject of objects that hold a feeling, there's one more, and it arrived last and quietly reframes everything around it. Pecharunt. It's small, a peach with a shell essentially, sitting in a bowl, which is a design choice I still find funny, given what it does. Pecharunt produces a substance called binding mochi, and feeding that mochi to something puts it under Pecharunt's control, by drawing out and amplifying whatever it secretly wants. That's how it got its retainers 3 Pokémon called Okidogi, Munkidori, and Phasandipity. They weren't henchmen who signed up, they were fed, and the old couple who supposedly gave Pecharunt its orders were themselves under its influence, which means the chain of command loops back on itself, and there's no point at the top where a person made a free decision. Pecharunt wanted attention, according to its own material. It wanted to be admired, and to get that it took hold of a few minds and sent them off to fetch something pretty, and the outcome of that errand is the next story I want to tell you. So hold on to it for a moment. Momotaro is sitting underneath all of this, obviously. The peach boy, the dog, the monkey, the pheasant, the ogre. In the folktale, the boy recruits the 3 animals with food, and they go and defeat the ogre together, and everyone agrees this is a good outcome. Paldea kept every element of that and rotated it about 90 degrees so that the peach is the problem and the food is coercion, which leaves the ogre. And I want to tell her story in the right order, because the order is the whole point of it. Ogapon and a companion came to the land of Kitakami from somewhere far away. They looked strange to the villagers, so they were shunned, and they went to live on a mountain outside the village. The game is clear that this saddened them, and also that they were happy enough together. Two outsiders keeping to themselves. A mask maker in the village felt sorry for them. So he carved 4 masks, beautiful ones, decorated with terra crystals, specifically so the pair could come down and join the festival without being stared at. That worked. It worked so well that word of the masks spread far beyond Kitakami, and that's what ruined everything, because the reputation of those masks is exactly what reached Petulant. So the 3 retainers came. They tracked the pair down, waited until Ogerpon was out, and went into the den for the masks. The companion came back and found them there. There was a struggle. The thieves got away with 3 masks. The companion held onto the 4th, the teal one, and did not survive. Ogerpon returned to a wrecked den, 1 mask on the floor, and no trace of its friend anywhere. What it did next, it did in a rage, and it killed all 3 of them, and it knocked Petulant out cold, and Petulant closed its shell and rolled away into the forest to sleep. And the villagers saw the end of that. Only the end. An ogre from outside the village in a fury, killing 3 creatures they'd never met. So they decided the 3 thieves had died protecting Kitakami from a monster. They named them the Loyal 3. They buried them with honour, built a monument, and started an annual festival celebrating their sacrifice, complete with masks carved in their likeness. Worshipping the Loyal 3 is supposed to bring you kindness, success, and good fortune. The mask maker tried to tell people what actually happened. Nobody believed him, and he was treated badly enough for saying it that he stopped saying it publicly and passed the true account down through his own family as a secret, specifically so his descendants wouldn't get the same treatment he did. It survived that way for generations until it reached a man called Yukito, who's still in Kitakami, still holding it. Ogerpon went back to its cave and stayed there for centuries, alone, wearing the 1 mask its friend managed to keep hold of. I've thought about this one more than almost anything else in the franchise. There's no villain in it, not really. The retainers were controlled, and Petulant was doing what it had been told by people it had already got hold of. The villagers weren't malicious, they were wrong, and they were wrong in the most ordinary way imaginable, which is that they arrived at the end of something and filled in the beginning themselves. And the correction existed the entire time, in one family, in one house, and nobody asked. That's not a Pokémon problem, that's just how it goes. Corydon and Miraidon. I'll do briefly, and mostly because I find their role genuinely strange. For most of Scarlet and Violet, your legendary is transport. It carries you, it climbs cliffs for you, it's asleep on the ground in the first cutscene because it's injured and hungry, and you feed it a sandwich. That is not the usual introduction, and the pair of them, a past form dragon and a future form dragon coexisting in the same crater, is the sort of thing that shouldn't work and does. The paradox Pokémon around them include ancient and hypothetical future versions of Raikou, Entei and Suicune, which means the 3 creatures that came out of a burning tower in Johto have counterparts a continent away, that are either 200 million years old or haven't happened yet. Nobody in either game makes the connection out loud. Terrapagos is the last one, and it's my favourite piece of new lore in years. The species existed in Paldea in the distant past and was very nearly wiped out by seismic shifts, roughly 2 million years ago. One survived. It survived by crystallizing its own body and going into hibernation, about 1 kilometre underground, in a cavern beneath what's now the great crater of Paldea, and it's been there ever since, asleep, in a shell it made out of itself, which is, I think, the loneliest survival strategy in the entire franchise. Every terra crystal in the region comes from that. The strange energy in Area 0, the crystalline formations, the entire terrestrial phenomenon that the games built a battle mechanic around. All of it is the byproduct of one animal's very long nap. The terra orbs that every trainer in Paldea carries were reverse engineered from studying it while it slept. A whole generation's central gimmick is, in-universe, the exhaust from a single, hibernating creature that nobody knew was down there. That's a proper piece of world building. There's a book in Scarlet and Violet, and depending on which version you're playing, it's either the Scarlet book or the Violet book. And you can read the whole thing, not a summary. The actual pages illustrated in the game. It's the account of an expedition into the Great Crater roughly 200 years ago, led by a man called Heath, and it describes creatures that shouldn't exist, things that look like ancient versions of familiar Pokémon in one version, and mechanical future versions in the other. Sketches of a beast resembling all three of the Johto legendaries at once, drawn by an artist who was clearly looking at something. And the reason that book matters to the plot is that a professor read it, believed it, and spent 10 years building a machine to reach whatever produced those sketches. Every strange thing in the modern game runs out of one old field journal that everyone else dismissed as fantasy. Heath found it first roughly 2 centuries ago, named it, and wrote it up, and nobody believed a word of it. His book was treated as fiction. It took his descendant Briar an entire career to prove he'd been telling the truth, which is a small echo of the Mask Maker. Now I say it out loud. So that's the shelf. The thing I keep noticing, having spent far too long with all of this, is how few of them are gods, in the sense the box art implies. A handful, genuinely. Most of the rest are something else entirely, made in a laboratory and then locked in a cave, built out of ice and rock and then buried by the people who used to leave offerings, killed in a fire and given a second body, turned to stone in a forest and written out of the story by the humans who took the credit, blamed for a murder they didn't commit and remembered wrongly for 400 years. They're not mostly powerful, they're mostly misremembered, and there's a lot I've left out tonight. The animated series has its own parallel set of legendary lore that overlaps with the games in some places and departs from them completely in others, which is a mess and an interesting mess. Melton and Melmetal, which arrived via a mobile game and are the only mythicals to do so. Whatever the next Legends game decides to dig up. Those can be other nights. For now, it's just a very long list of creatures that were made, or sealed, or forgotten, or misfiled, sitting in caves and craters and hotel lobbies, waiting for someone to come and read the plaque properly. Sleep